Hi, I'm Randy German, and I'm here with Kenko Outfitters. And today we're going to tie the hare's ear, unweighted nymph. Now, I've seen different tailing materials. I like to use just your basic pheasant tail, and all this makes it is a basic 2-ingredient fly. So again, I like to measure on the hook shank. We go 2/3 down the hook shank and pinch wrap to the shank of the hook. Double check your sizing before finishing off the attaching. I get a little more tail on that. There we go. A little more than that even. There. Measure twice, cut once. As you secure it to the hook, make sure, or at least try your best, that the golden pheasant barbs are on the top of the hook. It won't make it look as ununiform. Alright, second step is going to be attaching the copper wire. This will be the ribbing for the back section of our body. I like to do the copper wire the entire length of the hook. When you do the entire length of the hook and onto the side of the hook in particular, it gives it a little more of a flatter profile, but it also evenly distributes the weight of the hook. So in the water, one of the biggest advantages of this fly is that it looks very natural in the way it moves. So you want it to continue to stay natural by evenly weighting it. Again, I attach it to the side of the hook. I don't use really tight wraps. I use loose wraps forward, loose wraps back, and it secures it enough. I just don't want my fly to be too fat. So now the second part is going to be loosely attaching, not too loosely, but fairly loosely attaching the wild hare's ear. This is self-trimmed hare's ear. You can buy it pre-packaged. That works just fine. Attaching it in semi-tight wraps, kind of loose. I like buggier the better. I want to try to form a little taper to her. Just not too aggressive with taper, but a little taper nonetheless. So we're going to go a little more than halfway down the hook, barely halfway down the hook, before we tie in our wire, as well as get in our wing casing, which is probably one of the most important parts of this fly. So we're going to wrap the wire on an angle, giving you even, nice dispersed wraps. With this size 14, you'll get like 3 or 4 wraps, and then on the 4th or 5th you tie down. Make sure you give it a couple wraps on the tie down, just because after a few fish it can loosen up. This fly will last, it's not the most durable fly in the world, but it'll last quite a while if you tie it right. So your next section is going to be tying in the wing casing, which is slightly more barbs than you used on the tail. I use like 7 or 8 usually, 9, 10. Just don't use too much and use your own judgment. Now here I tie about halfway down through the barbs, and the reason for it is I want the wing casing to be part of the thicker part of the feather barb. And that's because I want it to be very predominant within the top of the fly, as well as you'll see in a second, it kind of splays out what will eventually become the imitation of my legs. You can easily make this fly a weighted fly by obviously adding a bead to the front of it and weighting it with non-toxic wire. Alright, there we go. They don't have to be even on the back. You'll see they just wrap right forward. Now the front part of the fly, if you want to get real complicated with it, some of the students I teach early on, I just tell them wrap it loose and go wild on it, just to kind of get used to wrapping the dubbing on it and trying to make it look buggier. But for me, I make a nice tight wrap on the base, and then I start getting buggier on top of it, because the front part here, the thorax of the fly, if you will, should be buggy. I'll tell you why. It's going to actually form the legs. So instead of using hackle, which you can, by the way, there's hare's ear variations that use hackle. This is just a very early Catskill hare's ear that I was taught to tie when I was younger. I've also seen the tail be hackle barbs, and I've seen it be ostrich and all sorts of other things, and none of it's wrong. It all just does different stuff. I like pheasant because it's readily available. Use it on all your other flies since it's there already, you know. Alright, so now we're going to tie down. And you'll notice right away, as soon as I make the wing casing, how the dubbing that was so loosely and looked terrible is going to form up real nice into the legs. And you can trim it up after, and I'll show you that. Trim the head down. Be sure not to cut your line. If you do, all's not lost. You can recover the fly, as you've probably seen me do in other videos. And then you do a nice whip finish. I do 4 or 5 on the whip. Trying your best not to crowd the head. It's a little crowded, but you can get a tippet through that easy. A little head cement for strength never hurt, although I'm pretty confident in my whip finish, and that is the Catskill style hare's ear. And again, I like to trim it up. I'll just kind of pluck some of the loose ones out because they're going to be gone by the first fish anyway. Trim up some of these long ones just so they kind of still stick out. And all those loose fibers will end up catching a lot of the air bubbles in between your cast. And then kind of looks like the bubbles that come out of a nymph's gills as they flee. So this is a great trailer fly. I usually trail it behind, and there's the wing casing on the back. I usually trail it behind a weighted fly. So again, this is Randy German, and can't go out photos.